At 1:03 a.m., a man walked into my store and knew my name, even though I had never told him. I didn't know it yet, but that was the night I stopped feeling safe. My name is Alyssa Carter. I'm 24, and I work the overnight shift at a small gas station just off Route 47 outside Cedar Hollow, Ohio. It's the kind of place people only find when they're desperate, low on fuel, lost in the dark, or trying not to be seen. I took the job because it was quiet, predictable. Nothing ever happened out there. At least that's what I thought. It started on a damp Thursday night, a little after 1 o'clock a.m. The air outside clung to the windows like sweat, and the fluorescent lights above me buzzed with that faint electric hum that gets inside your head if you listen too long. I was debating whether to microwave a stale honey bun I didn't even want when the doorbell chimed. The sound made me flinch harder than it should have. A man stepped inside, mid-40s, maybe early 50s, hard to tell. He wore a dark forest green jacket that looked too heavy for the season. His hair was uneven, like he'd cut it himself. His lips were cracked and pale, but it wasn't how he looked that made my stomach tighten. It was how he looked at me, not like a stranger, like someone recognizing something he'd been searching for. "Evening," I said automatically, giving him the same polite smile I give everyone. He didn't smile back. "You're always here this late," he said. It wasn't a question. I blinked. "Yeah, most nights." He nodded slowly, like he'd just confirmed a theory. "I thought so. I've driven by a few times. It's always you behind the counter." Something about that didn't sit right. People pass through all the time. I never remembered faces, so how long had he been noticing me? "Small town," I shrugged. He didn't move toward the coolers, didn't grab coffee, didn't browse the shelves. He just stood there, watching. "Alyssa," he said, my throat tightened. I wasn't wearing a name tag. Before I could ask how he knew that, he gestured toward the dry erase board behind me where I'd written, "Pumpkin spice is back." "You press harder on your downstrokes," he said casually. "And you don't fully close your A's. It's distinctive." My skin prickled. I've seen that handwriting before. I didn't answer. He let the silence stretch like it belonged to him. Finally, he gave a small nod. "I'm Daniel," he said. "I noticed details, that's all." He didn't buy a thing. He walked back out into the misty parking lot, swallowed by fog and darkness. But something told me that wasn't the last time I'd see him. After that, he started appearing. Not every shift. Not often enough that I could confidently say the word stalker out loud, but often enough that coincidence stopped feeling believable. Sometimes he came inside. Sometimes he stayed in his car at the edge of the lot, headlights off, engine silent, just sitting there. One night, I decided to pretend he didn't bother me. He came in, grabbed a bottle of water, placed it on the counter without breaking eye contact. "You seem tense tonight," he said. "Just tired," I replied. His gaze drifted around the store slowly, like he was memorizing the layout. "It must feel isolated out here," he said. "Just you, miles of empty road. No one would hear if something happened." My fingers tightened around the register. "I'm fine." He leaned forward slightly, resting his palms on the counter. "You ever think about how vulnerable that makes you?" His tone wasn't aggressive. It wasn't even threatening. It was calm, curious, like he was discussing the weather forecast. And somehow that made it worse. I took a step back. He tilted his head slightly, studying me like I was a puzzle piece he hadn't placed yet. "You lock the stockroom every night," he said. "Around 2:05 a.m. you check it twice. That's smart." My blood went cold. I had never told anyone that. I didn't respond. I couldn't. He gave a soft, almost sympathetic smile. "I'll let you get back to work. Didn't mean to make you uneasy." Uneasy. Like this was small talk. He walked back into the fog again, disappearing beyond the glow of the gas pumps. After that night, I stopped pretending it was harmless. I started walking to my car with my keys threaded between my knuckles. I kept a heavy wrench beneath the register. I replaced the thin blinds in my apartment with blackout curtains. I double-locked my bathroom door when I showered, even though I lived alone. Some nights he didn't show up. Sometimes a full week would pass. But that didn't calm me down. It made it worse. because not knowing when he'd appear again felt like waiting for a storm you couldn't track on radar. Then one night, I came back from a quick restroom break and found something sitting on the counter. A Polaroid photo. It was me. I was outside the building, refilling the windshield washer fluid station near pump 3. The picture had been taken that same night. Close. Too close. Close enough that whoever took it had been standing in the dark behind the ice freezer. There was no message written on it, but someone had circled the word windshield printed on the machine in red ink. Specifically the letter I, the same way he had pointed out my handwriting before. My hand started shaking. He wasn't just watching the store, he was watching me. The next time he walked in, I didn't pretend anymore. "Get out," I said immediately. He stopped a few feet from the counter. "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police." He nodded slowly, like he had expected this moment. "That's fair." "You've been following me," I said. My voice cracked and I hated that he heard it. He didn't look offended. "I think you're someone who's used to people overlooking you," he said calmly. "I thought maybe you'd appreciate someone who really sees you." "That's not seeing me," I snapped. "That's obsession." He studied my face like he was collecting the reaction. "Would it help if I acted casual?" he asked. Bought a soda, made small talk about football, pretended I didn't notice your shoes are always slightly too big, or how your left eyelid twitches when you're exhausted. My stomach dropped. He had cataloged me. By then, I was already dialing 911. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't move at all. He just stood there with his hands at his sides, waiting. The police arrived within minutes. He went quietly, no struggle, no raised voice, just calm. They searched his car. Inside, they found a spiral notebook, page after page of timestamps. My shifts, the times I took trash out, what I wore, what snacks I bought during breaks. One page had my name written over and over again, smaller each time, until it dissolved into tight, frantic spirals. He told the officers the same thing again and again. "I just noticed details, I'm observant," like that made it normal. A restraining order was filed that week. I quit the night shift. I transferred to a different station nearly 3 hours away. I moved apartments. I told myself it was over. But sometimes, when I'm driving home and headlights stay behind me a little too long, my neck starts to burn. And every once in a while, when I'm half asleep, I hear the way he said my name. Slowly, carefully, like he had practiced it, like he had plans for it. And what scares me most, he never once denied taking that photo. He only said, "I noticed things, so now I have to wonder." At 2:18 a.m., a hand came up from under my front desk and rang the bell, and I still don't know how long he'd been hiding there before I noticed. What happened next is why I don't work nights anymore. My name's Ethan Cole. I'm 29. And until recently, I worked the overnight shift at a small roadside motel outside Boone County, Kentucky. Not a chain, just a 2-story family-owned place with about 25 rooms and a quiet highway out front. Most nights were dead silent, that's why I liked it. The layout was simple, front lobby with a desk and a little brass service bell. Behind that, a hallway led to a back office where I'd hang out. Couch, mini fridge, TV, security monitors. There was a speaker back there that chimed whenever someone hit the bell. Usually, I'd just relax in the back and wait for the ding. That Tuesday night in late October, it was cold, low 40s, and the lot only had a handful of guest vehicles. Around 2:00 a.m., the bell rang. I walked to the lobby, no one there. I checked outside, empty road, no headlights, no movement. I told myself I must have misheard it, went back to the office. 10 minutes later, ding. This time I moved faster, still no one. Now my stomach tightened. I stepped outside and scanned the parking lot. Same 5 cars, all dark, no engines running. I went back in and stayed behind the desk instead of returning to the lounge. Maybe someone was messing with me, some bored guest pulling a prank. 15 quiet minutes passed. Then ding. Loud, clear, right in front of me. The lobby was empty. I felt my skin crawl. I checked behind the brochure rack, the bathrooms, even stepped outside again. Nothing. This time I stayed seated directly behind the desk. I dimmed the lights and stared at the bell. 20 minutes went by. My eyes got heavy. And just as I started to relax, the bell rang again. But this time I saw it. A pale hand slowly rose from beneath the counter and pressed the bell, right in front of me. I jumped back so hard my chair tipped over. I didn't think. I ran down the hallway, into the back office, slammed the door, locked it. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. Someone had been hiding under the desk, feet away from me, for who knows how long. I forced myself to look at the security monitors. The lobby camera showed my chair knocked over. Then, in the lower corner of the screen, movement. A head slowly lifted from behind the desk. I couldn't see his face clearly, just eyes, staring straight into the camera, watching. I dialed 911 with shaking hands and whispered that someone was inside the building. While I was on the phone, I saw him crawl fully out from behind the desk. He was tall, hoodie pulled tight around his face, moving slowly. Calm, he walked around the lobby like he was browsing, like this was normal. Then he turned and headed toward the hallway, toward me. I pressed my back against the locked door. A second later, the doorknob moved, slowly. One quiet rattle, then silence. The dispatcher kept asking if I was safe, but I couldn't answer. I couldn't breathe. On the monitor, I saw him pacing the lobby again. He stood by the front doors, staring outside like he was waiting for something. Then he casually flipped through the brochure rack, like he had all the time in the world. Finally, flashing red and blue lights filled the parking lot. The second he saw them, he ran, off camera, gone. When police cleared the building, they found a heavy rock near the entrance, used to prop the front door open without it locking. But they never found him. He slipped out before they got inside. I replay that moment in my head all the time. That hand rising up, slow, calm, deliberate. He wasn't rushing, which means he wasn't surprised to see me there. And here's what still bothers me most. The first bell rang almost 20 minutes before I ever saw him. So now I have to wonder, was he already under the desk then? Or was he inside the building long before I ever heard that first ding? Because if he was patient enough to wait in the dark under my desk, how many other nights had someone been closer to me than I ever realized? I don't work there anymore. But sometimes, when I hear a small bell ring in a store, I still look down first. At 3:02 a.m., 2 cars without license plates were idling outside my gas station, and I was the only employee on shift. If my friends hadn't shown up that night, I don't think I'd be here telling this. This happened last night. I'm 22, and I work the overnight shift at a 24-hour gas station just outside Springfield, Missouri. I've only been there about 2 months. I work Thursday through Saturday nights. My coworker, I'll call him Ethan, covers the weekday shifts. Around 2:30 a.m., Ethan and his friend Jake stopped by to grab coffee and say hi. They'd taken mushrooms earlier that night, so they were in that overly giggly, everything is funny mood. Honestly, it made the shift less boring. While we were talking, Jake casually mentioned something that made the mood shift. "Hey, did you see that car out there?" he asked. "What car?" He told me there was a vehicle parked at the far end of the lot, engine running, lights off, someone inside. Apparently, it had already been there before they arrived. Jake said he walked up and asked the driver what he was doing. The guy claimed he was waiting for a DoorDash order. That would have made sense, except I hadn't received a single delivery order in almost 2 hours. Still, we brushed it off. I had been cleaning in the back most of the night, nowhere near the front windows. I hadn't even seen the car myself. Ethan and Jake went back outside to smoke and let Ethan's dog run around the lot. That's when things got weird. About an hour later, they came back in for refills. And that's when Ethan filled in the details he hadn't mentioned before. The car hadn't just been parked randomly. It was positioned in a blind spot. A place I wouldn't be able to see from behind the register because the side wall blocks that angle. And during the entire hour they were outside, the driver kept watching them, then looking at his phone, then watching the entrance to the lot, then watching the store doors, over and over. Jake, still high, finally walked up to the car and said, "Why are you staring at us?" At first, the guy pretended he didn't speak English. When that didn't work, he suddenly switched to perfect English and claimed he had the wrong address. Then he sped out of the lot. But here's the part that made my stomach turn. Ethan noticed the car looked brand new. No license plate, not even a temporary tag. And in the back seat, a pile of blankets, big enough to hide someone underneath. But that wasn't the worst part. While they were confronting the first car, another vehicle had pulled into the lot. Also brand new. Also no license plate. Also lights off. And the second the first car left, the second car followed it out. Like they were together. Ethan stayed another 15 minutes before leaving. Before he walked out, he told me to keep the doors locked tight and to call him if anything felt off. Around 6 a.m., he came back for more coffee, completely sober this time, and shaken. He admitted that once the high wore off, the situation didn't feel funny anymore. "If we hadn't been out there," he said quietly, "I don't know what would have happened." Neither did I. Because if those cars were waiting for me to be alone, a pocket knife wouldn't have meant much. I wish that was the end of it, but it wasn't. The next night, around 3 a.m., I was mopping the floors when 4 guys came in for coffee and snacks. As I was ringing them up, one of them asked, "Hey, you know about that car out there?" I froze. "What car?" He said there was a brand new Subaru parked at the far end of the lot. Engine running, lights off, no license plate, and it looked like 2 men were arguing inside. My heart dropped straight into my stomach, because that meant one thing: they came back, and this time I was completely alone. I didn't know it yet, but what happened next made me realize something terrifying. They were never just watching the parking lot. They were watching me. And this time, they weren't leaving so easily. I told the group what happened the night before. Same description, same blind spot. But last night there had only been one guy. The one who seemed like the leader, a tall guy in a flannel jacket, shook his head. "Nah," he said. "There were 2 tonight." He told me the car had already been there when they pulled in. It didn't move while they pumped gas, just sat there. Engine running, lights off. They were parked at the farthest pump from the entrance, so they had to walk past the Subaru to get inside. That's when they heard it. One of the men inside wasn't yelling, but he was talking loud, agitated, and he was pointing toward the store doors, toward me. One of the guys from the group started walking toward the car to ask if everything was okay. The second the men inside noticed they were being approached, the car slammed into reverse. Tires screeched, and it sped out of the lot, gone, just like the night before. When I told them about the second vehicle that followed the first car the previous night, their expressions changed. They offered to stay. "Just in case," one of them said. I didn't argue. They hung around for about 20 minutes, walked in and out casually, stood near the windows, made it obvious I wasn't alone. Eventually, when nothing else happened, we all agreed it was probably over. Before they left, I let them refill their coffee for free. It felt like the smallest thank you I could give. And then I was alone again. The rest of the shift was quiet. Too quiet. Every time headlights passed on the highway, my chest tightened. When I finally had to step outside to change the trash near the pumps, I scanned the dark edges of the lot like I expected someone to step out from behind the ice machine. Nothing did, but that almost made it worse. Here's what unsettles me the most. I never once saw that car myself. Not the first night, not the second, but multiple, completely different groups of people warned me about it. Same description, same behavior, same blind spot. And the fact that it showed up 2 nights in a row at almost the exact same time, parking where I couldn't see it from the register, that doesn't feel random. That feels deliberate. If Ethan and Jake hadn't been there the first night, if those 4 guys hadn't shown up the second night, would those men have eventually walked through the door? Were they waiting for the moment I was completely alone? I carry a knife at work, but if there were multiple people involved, I don't know if that would have mattered. Thankfully, I'm off for a few days, but when I go back, I don't know what scares me more, seeing that Subaru again or realizing they were never planning to come inside while anyone else was around. Because now I can't stop thinking about one thing. They kept choosing the one spot in the lot where I couldn't see them, which means they weren't trying to avoid attention. They were trying to avoid me knowing they were there. And if they were patient enough to wait twice, how many more nights would they have waited for me to finally be alone? At 1:12 a.m., I realized I had let a man into the hotel who technically didn't exist, and he was still sitting 10 feet away from me. So how did he get inside? And what was he really waiting for? Let me tell you what happened. About a year ago, I was working the night shift at a small roadside hotel in upstate Ohio. 3 floors, maybe 40 rooms total. On weeknights, we were lucky if 15 were occupied. I worked 10 o'clock p.m. to 6 o'clock a.m., and most nights were painfully quiet. The lobby was small, front desk, a couple of couches facing a TV, and vending machines humming in the corner. Behind the desk was a tiny office with a glass window so I could see everything. After midnight, the front doors locked automatically. Guests had to buzz in and I'd press a button to unlock it. Most nights, nothing happened, but this one did. Around 11 o'clock p.m., a man buzzed the door. Mid-40s, tall, lean, baseball cap pulled low, jeans, backpack slung over one shoulder. He walked up to the desk and asked for a room. I gave him the rate. He nodded and handed me a card. I swiped it. It beeped like it went through. I printed a key card for room 214 and handed it to him. He stared at me, not in a flirty way, not angry, just blank. His eyes stayed locked on mine for a few seconds too long. Then he turned and walked toward the elevator. It wasn't enough to call it creepy, but it was enough to stick in my mind. Around midnight, I looked up from my phone and saw him again. He wasn't upstairs. He was sitting in the lounge area. The TV wasn't even on. He wasn't on his phone, wasn't reading, wasn't asleep, just sitting there, facing a blank screen. I figured maybe he couldn't sleep. Some guests hang out in the lobby at night. It happens. But after 30 minutes, I realized something was off. He hadn't moved. At one point, I got up to grab a bottle of water from the vending machine. As I walked across the lobby, I could feel him turn his head and follow me with his eyes. I didn't look at him, but I felt it. That slow tracking sensation. I hurried back behind the desk. Around 1 o'clock a.m., I started messing around in the reservation system because I was bored. That's when everything changed. Room 214 showed as vacant. I frowned and refreshed the page, still vacant. I pulled up the check-in log. Nothing. No name, no transaction, no card on file. I went into the payment records. No charge. My stomach dropped. I remembered swiping his card. I remembered the confirmation beep. But according to the system, that transaction never happened. It was like he was never checked in at all. I immediately called room 214. It rang and rang and rang. No answer. Then I checked the electronic key entry log for that room. It shows every time a key card unlocks the door. There were no entries. No one had opened that room all night. That's when it hit me. He never went upstairs. He never had a room. He had just stayed. I slowly looked over toward the lounge, and there he was, still sitting there, staring at a black TV screen. My chest felt tight. I told myself maybe the system glitched. Maybe I messed something up. Maybe I was overthinking it, but deep down I knew he wasn't a guest, and he wasn't supposed to be there. I waited 15 more minutes watching him through the office window. At 1:30 a.m., I forced myself to walk over. I asked if everything was okay. He turned his head slowly toward me, his face completely expressionless. "I just can't sleep," he said calmly. Then he turned back to the blank screen. I nodded and walked back to the desk. But this time my hands were shaking because I knew something wasn't right, and I was alone. At 3:57 a.m., a man who didn't exist leaned over my desk and smiled. If the police had been 5 minutes later, I don't know what would have happened. Let me tell you how close this came to ending very differently. Like I said, I was alone on the night shift at that small Ohio hotel. Around 2 o'clock a.m., I realized he wasn't sitting in the lounge anymore. My stomach dropped instantly. I scanned the lobby. Nothing. Then I saw him. He was standing at the far end of the hallway near the public restrooms, half hidden in the shadow where the overhead light didn't quite reach. He wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. I pretended to focus on the computer, but I kept glancing up. After a few minutes, he slowly walked back and sat down again like nothing had happened. I called my manager at home and explained everything. The missing reservation, the empty room, the wandering. She sounded half asleep and told me to just keep an eye on him and call the police if he did anything threatening. I remember hanging up and thinking, it already feels threatening. I pulled up the camera feeds. On one hallway camera, I watched him walk all the way to the end of the first floor corridor. He stopped there and just stood still for several minutes. Then he turned and walked back. Later, he went into the stairwell and stayed there for almost 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Doing what? I have no idea. Every time I looked up, he had moved again, near the vending machines, by the elevators, once standing in the dim corner of the lobby where the light barely touched his face. He was always staring. By 3:30, my nerves were shot. I called the non-emergency police line and explained there was a man in the hotel who wasn't a registered guest and was acting strangely. They said they'd send someone to check it out. While I was waiting, he moved closer. He stood about 15 feet from the desk, just watching me. He barely blinked, didn't speak, didn't smile, just stared. I pretended to type, but my hands were shaking so badly I kept hitting the wrong keys. Then, around 3:50, the front door buzzer went off. For a split second, I thought it was the police. It wasn't. It was a late arriving guest. I let him in quickly, and I watched the man in the lounge turn his head slowly and follow that guest with his eyes as he crossed the lobby. It wasn't casual, it was studying, like he was taking notes. A few minutes later, the man disappeared again. I checked the cameras. My heart nearly stopped. He was standing directly outside one of the guest room doors on the first floor. Not knocking, not pacing, just standing there. 3 full minutes. That's when I called 911. I told them there was a man who wasn't a guest standing outside an occupied room, and I didn't know what he was planning. They said officers were on the way. I kept my eyes locked on the monitor. After a while, he slowly walked back to the lobby. Then he came straight toward the desk. He leaned over the counter, close enough that I could see the veins in his eyes. "Is there any food?" he asked softly. His voice was low and flat. I told him there were vending machines. He gave a small, almost amused smile and walked away. I stared at the clock. For 10 a.m., 2 officers finally walked in. I felt like I could breathe again. I pointed straight at him. He was back on the couch like he hadn't been stalking hallways for the past 4 hours. They questioned him, asked for ID. After a few minutes, they escorted him outside. One of the officers came back in and told me the truth. The credit card he gave me was stolen. He had no reservation, no legitimate ID tied to the room. He had never been checked in. He had just used the stolen card to get access inside the building. They arrested him for trespassing and fraud, but that's not what haunts me. What haunts me is this. He was inside that hotel for hours, wandering the halls, standing outside guest rooms, watching me, studying other guests, and I have no idea what he would have done if I hadn't noticed the system glitch. That was the scariest night of my life, and I still think about how easy it would have been for me to ignore that missing reservation and just assume everything was fine.